Just to say that I've been doing a lot of writing lately, although I haven't published it, and I just started writing something very simple about the word hue in human, and looking at everything about individuality and how everything is divided in duality, and our whole outlook on the world is dual. So spirit duality kind of thing, being the spirit realm and the manifest physical realm kind of thing, and looking into like a virtual reality, and that we project reality rather than believing that we receive what we're seeing with the outside world. There's an element that we are projecting what we receive, as in we each see our own individual version of what's in the mind. So the mind is the spirit side, and then there's the physical realm. And so we are receiving information from the mind and projecting it through the eyes, so we all see a different version of reality, unless what's in our mind is the very same, in which case we're seeing what other people see if they see the same thing that's in the mind. And so the word hue, meaning colour, and colour is a spectrum, and so in a spectrum everyone's in their own part of the spectrum, so that's a part. And to have a place within a spectrum is to divide the spectrum into this side or that side, the inside, the outside. And all of that led me anyway into starting to just look at, through something as simple as Wikipedia, but just loads of dates of events that happened down through history, and particularly either side of the 1600s, which is the reign of from Prince James of Scotland to be King James of Scotland to be King James of Scotland and England, the unifying of these two. So it's a huge amount of stuff, but the simple thing that I'm saying here is what I've been looking into is how language forms a virtual reality. And so language is of the mind, and what's in the mind projects onto the world, and so ideas in the mind become the reality that we see outside, that we project from the inside to the outside kind of thing. So for example, the word sky is where we get science, and it means to cut etymologically kind of thing. So what's going on in the 1600s is the discovery of America and the projection onto an idea that America is the new Eden, and the printing of the New Testament is the printing of the new idea of a new Eden type of thing in the New England, in the New World, all of that kind of thing. So the incorporation of corporations, which all leads to the Great Fire of 1666 and the burning of all old records and the starting anew, which is a new reset, which is to divide from the past to what will be the future kind of thing. And the upshot of where I've got to with all that by now is, for example, the language of angels, which is what John Dee is looking into. John Dee, who's the one who came up with the idea of the British Empire being a whole new world based in America kind of thing. And yeah, so what I'm talking about here is actually with language. The language of angels is really the language of angles, and the angles refers to mathematics kind of thing, and mathematics refers to archaeology, which is to build in stone, or it is written in stone. So things that are written in stone are buildings, and buildings are building the environment, and the environment is a word for the world. So building a new world which is written in stone, which is everything to do with London being the new Jerusalem and all that kind of stuff. So it's way complicated what I'm thinking about the minute, and it's like thousands of years of history recorded. So a cord is a rope, and to record is to re-rope, or to, what's a rope? A rope is lots of threads tied together. So history ties together lots of threads as records, and to record is the same as to reset kind of thing. So there you go. Yeah, so I've just used the word archaeology there where I had actually meant to say architecture. But architecture is like the modern version of what archaeology is studying, which is the megalithic use of stones to map out the land to mirror the heavens, using the earth globe as itself as a way to map the heavens, kind of thing. So with John Dee is around the same time as Shakespeare, and Shakespeare is the creating myths as histories, as theatre, with the Globe Theatre. And it's at the time where the European empires of the European royalties have got their ships, but they've also got muskets. They've also finally got guns that can pierce armour. So the age of chivalry and knights is over, and it's now armies, and maths is totally needed to be able to fight wars. And so mathematical languages and the reconstruing from Latin and various older languages, creating a more modern English language. And the language that you speak is like using a computer software. The language that's used dictates what the inner eye is seeing. The word education means to draw out what is within. You see the imagery there of the monotheism becoming a duotheism. So this is also the time in which Catholicism is being protested by the reformers, who become the Puritans, who become the settlers, who resettle America by transplanting people from Europe and Britain to America to replace the native peoples. The same thing was happening in transplanting English people to Ireland. It's called the plantations. So similar things are happening these days. What Trump properly represents at the moment is another great reset, in the sense of clearing out all of the past to make a brand new world, which is quite a transhumanist world. And humanists were also being affected 400 years ago by the Protestants. All a bit fascinating to look into, kind of thing. But when we look into the past, it's all like rivers that have been canalized, kind of thing. The history of the victors is not really telling what really happened. It's telling the version that the victors want to have remembered. Thus they have taken all those threads and recorded them to make a rope from which we're all hanging these days, kind of thing. So architecture, it is written in stone, through writing in stone, through creating of buildings, through creating the maps and building on those maps. So you have things like London. When was London formed? London is formed by the Romans. Well, actually, who are the Romans? And the Romans essentially is just a idea rather than a race of people. It's an administrative idea rather than being a country, kind of thing. Fascinating. So the idea with our history is that the Romans came to London in 0047 AD 47, and they created London, and then in the 500s or 500 years later or whatever, the Roman Empire falls and there is no history anymore, kind of thing. And it's not until 1066 kind of idea that London starts to have meaning again. So 500-year blocks, 500 years later, you get the end of the Dark Ages and the beginning of the Renaissance and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, I'm using very loose dates here, partly on purpose. But something which I do want to kind of mention is you've got the Inner Temple in London. You've got the idea that there's the temple in London as a whole area. You've you've got the square mile of London, which is right beside the temple, and in between the temple and the square mile of London, you've got the bar. It's called the Temple Bar, and the Temple Bar is a barrier between the temple and the royalty. So the Knights Templar are the ones who built the temple type of idea, and they have control over monarchs. So the Knights Templar are the bankers, the Knights Templar are the post office system, the Knights Templars are the ones who are running the messages from God to the earthlings kind of idea. All based around this New Jerusalem, Old Jerusalem kind of idea. So we're all ruled over in an exoteric world where we have things like the Bible stories, which are missing the keys to unlock those mysteries kind of thing. So the knowledge that's been occulted in the medieval ages is the knowledge which would explain what's all this esoteric knowledge, the esoteric sciences. So we're ruled over by exoteric science, and the outside that we're granted to, we are not privy to what's on the inside if we were to understand what's inside of all these writings kind of stuff. But anyway, I'm looking into all that stuff and it's dead interesting. Bye now.
So I keep thinking of new things I wanted to add. But when I was thinking about this last night, just the origin of crypto, and I was thinking, what is the etymology? And I know Kelvin Oberon, he's very good on languages and looking back into what do these words really mean? Where did they actually come from? Which is a good practice. And so I was looking at crypto or crypt, and they said it came from the Greek kryptos, Kryptos, and kryptos means hidden. And so I think in some ways, again, going back to this question, is Bitcoin good or bad? That's presuming that's at one level, right? But there are hidden levels of the purpose of, in my opinion, crypto, what crypto is. You might imagine that it's money, but I've done the descent map and I can see it's about way more than money. It's also about digital governance and cybernetics and signals intelligence and crowdsourcing. And there may very well be many other layers of this crypto thing that I have not yet encountered and I can't even conceptualize because my mind is too little. So the hidden part is, things are obscured. And sometimes things are hidden right out in the open and sometimes they're hidden in a tricky way. But solving these puzzles, and I think that is maybe something that is part of this quantum processing, is that people are really creative in solving puzzles. And again, because we have this access to the divine, to the field, the quantum field, whatever is engineered that doesn't have that is at a disadvantage. So they'd really like for us to partner with it and get in there so that maybe we can solve some of these puzzles that can't be solved otherwise. And so when I was Googling, the first thing that came up with Kryptos, Kryptos, was a sculpture at the CIA.
So what's curious about that is, Alison and I, we don't particularly communicate for a few years there because she'd gone off Facebook and whatever else, and I'm only on Facebook until Substack, and then she came and found me on Substack there a few months ago. But it's just me noticing that it's like we are a world brain, not just me and Alison, but me and Alison and a few other people having similar discoveries of stuff at the same kind of time, and in her completely different way, coming across cryptos to mean things that are hidden, while in the same few days I've been looking at the Shakespeare stuff and John Dee stuff and all of that, which is also cryptos because it's hidden and hidden in plain sight. And that in itself is interesting, isn't it? Anyway.
Frequency and cymatics. So there was an interesting synchronicity there. And so I want to mention, in terms of the encryption and cryptos, is that it does link to acoustics. And early on when I was doing some research, and I think, I'm not sure if Raul was the one who brought this to my attention, but is this place called the Fox Labs outside of Chicago, Illinois. And Colonel Fabian, who was one of the first independent private think tanks, like defense interest government think tanks. And he was an eccentric man. And he hired all of his own scientists to do various kinds of research, including into plant genetics and into scoliosis and into this Baconian cipher. And he had a cottage that was remade by Frank Lloyd Wright, and he had a very important Japanese garden. This is the late 19th century, and a windmill and cages with bears in them and maybe monkeys, and there was a lot going on. And essentially the two of the people who are working there were William and Elizabeth Friedman. And William Friedman, he was the plant geneticist, and Elizabeth Friedman was working with this other woman on the Baconian cipher, and they essentially became the premier puzzle solvers and cryptanalysts in the United States in the years leading up to World War I. And William Friedman founded the NSA, and Elizabeth Friedman was working closely behind the scenes with the FBI during Prohibition, tracking down people like Joseph Kennedy and his rum running, like the distillery people. So that was super interesting. And then this, the estate still exists as a county park, the Fabian Villa, and it's literally like 10 miles from Fermilab, one of the Department of Energy labs on the Fox River, and you can see the cyclotron there, the circle. So that's a pretty interesting coincidence. And Colonel Fabian, he focused on acoustical instruments and tuning forks. And so he worked with Wallace Clement Sabine in 1918, and they developed this acoustical laboratory for industrial applications and soundproofing, but also made these tuning forks, which are still in production. The Riverbank Labs tuning forks you can still buy them, and they're very important for industry purposes. But of course, there's a lot of health therapeutic pieces as well. And so I think it was really interesting that what Joseph was promoting in his, or talking about cymatics and frequency and packing in his blog post was this idea of cymatics and frequency and molecules and accessing quantum reality. And I keep going back to what was going on at Riverbank Labs, right? And it's still there. It still exists, that you could still buy their tuning forks. And how does this acoustic standing wave aspect factor into how we are navigating today's reality with Web3? Super interesting. So there's George Fabian, his estate in Geneva, Illinois, of course, right? And he has the Dutch windmill. I mean, it's structure and what's his face? The guy who was working with the light, Walter Russell, I think, Walter Russell, and his ideas about chemicals, and that maybe there's some aspect of chemicals that they're not how we understand them to be. And I think this might sort of bump up against what Joseph's talking about, is the field and resonance. And so maybe things come into manifestation under certain kinds of conditions. And that, again, if we are being managed through consciousness, like, how does it all connect? Like, are we making our own reality? And then if we're making our own reality, what reality are we building? Especially if we're doom scrolling the internet a lot. I don't know. I found it just much nicer to be outside and watching the cardinals and the juncos, the little winter birds coming. But I guess we can't do that all the time. But I'm just trying to figure out how this operating system works. So definitely, even if you don't fully understand it, these images that Joseph has created are quite beautiful. And thinking about, like, wow, there's a lot that we just don't know about how all of this stuff works. And it involves history and knowledges that we just don't have access to yet. And so we should just be mindful of being put by the feed into states of anxiety so that we're operating at our sort of biosurvival state level and we're not thinking about bigger things. Because I think once we think about the bigger things, maybe it opens up some more opportunities. So this is a little bit of a to be continued.
Yeah, so that's all pretty fascinating, actually, because the second synchronicity there is those researchers into the Baconian codes. Well, that's the Francis Bacon codes, which again is back to John Dee and deVere and Shakespeare. And so these guys in the late 1800s, the early 1900s, are trying to break codes, and those same code breakers are what formed the National Security Association, or whatever the NSA stands for, which is basically all the precursors to the CIA and stuff. And in British history, under Queen Elizabeth, is when Wolsey, or whatever his name was, I have to look into all that stuff more carefully, but the secret services and European spies spying on each other, spying on royal families, this family against that family, that all begins, according to British history, under that same rule with the likes of John Dee, kind of thing. So this ends up being what people now talk about with the Jesuits, and the Jesuits against the Protestants, and all of these kind of ideas in terms of who's actually behind Trump, or who's actually behind even China these days, kind of thing. And another comment to make about the China thing and looking into stuff in this week is the printing press was in China for a few hundred years before the Europeans got their hands on it, according to history. And yet the printing press is what completely catalyzed and changed European history, really. One of the main things. The other thing that comes from China, that China had for hundreds of years before the Europeans got their hands on it, is gunpowder. And it's around 1600 where gunpowder becomes muskets with safe, repeatable fire again and again and again without blowing yourself up instead of blowing the enemy up, kind of thing. So I just found that interesting, that there are two big technological advances that China had that then come to Europe, that then totally changed the ability of Europeans to go mass scale with their wars, type of thing. And then, coincidentally, what's the third thing coming from supposedly China? As if the West didn't have it and had no involvement whatsoever, no communications with China. But what's that thing is the gain of function spike proteins, what gets called the COVID virus, mind virus, that has facilitated the nanotechnology in the injections at the same time as the nanotechnology is getting spread all over the world anyway, because it's in so many products anyway. And what's it doing? It's replicating nano stuff that's in our bodies anyway. Again, it's interesting to listen to Alison McDowell there, because she's actually got so much research and the ability to look at things from all kinds of sides. And interesting for me that she's really beginning these days to get her head around, hang on a minute, have I just been sucked into an ant machine here to try and figure things out for the ant machine, figuring out these problems, so I'm being utilized by something I don't know what it is to figure out things for that thing, and that thing may be able to be the big control system, the evil thing, which then needs to be balanced by the question of, is it an evil thing, or is it just nature? What is the nature of being in a body? What are bodies really? How do we understand so little about even our own thoughts, or how the bodies function on that nanoscale? And there's a possibility that whatever these evil people are researching is actually life, kind of thing. And that perhaps all of this works out for good, even though looking at history, it seems that it's all working out for bad, kind of stuff. But yeah, so the coincidences there going on, because actually the stuff I've written in this last week, the stuff I've been looking into, I haven't been posting about. And so it's very funny for me that not only does she mention me in her little video there, but she's even mentioning things that are so parallel to what I'm studying without knowing what I'm studying. And I'm noticing this happening with Jamie Arthur Pickup and with Angie Hinks and various other people actually studying the exact same stuff that I'm studying in the exact same time. So the thing I'm talking about there is some sort of a resonant standing wave frequency revelations thing tied in with astrology, I suppose, as a language which maps the upper world to the lower world, or the inner world to the outer world, or all this hermeticism, and again the John Dee stuff. Because how is it that we're all having the same sorts of revelations on the same days, even though we may have been looking into this stuff for years? The actual insights and seeing through things so clearly is only happening these days. Or with the John Dee, deVere, Shakespeare stuff, 400 years people have been looking into that, and yet it's only 6 years ago that some two people noticed some things just on 2 sheets of paper, and those sheets of paper show really clearly that Edward deVere and John Dee are the ones who have created these ciphers, the same ciphers that hundreds of years later the Americans, with names like Fabian, by the way, which is the Labour Party, which is the, again, slow, sneaky, wearing a mask, same symbology. So the Fabian Society is running off the same ideas that Dee and the masquerades are running off in the courts of Elizabeth. Round and round and round in circles, but interesting stuff. Okay, bye.
The auditorium was full of people supporting Children's Health Defense and Bobby, and they couldn't grok because our minds are coherence engines, and they're not taking in information and revising the model. Most people have a model, and if they find something that's inconsistent with the model, it just bounces off. And that's why my story isn't popular. And it could be my story is totally wrong. Like I'm open. I'm not saying I can only speak to where I am on the elephant. But the fact that you would have people like Whitney Webb writing whole giant books about Jeffrey Epstein, but not really unpacking the Santa Fe Institute in complexity when Epstein was a funder of that, right? When this Jungian analyst is working in complexity theory, and we know that this is about archetypal morphic fields, and then we see Michaela Uluru and Annelos Smitsman working on benevolent AI with Singularity Net and Ben Goertzel, and Ben Goertzel's all about the AI shouldn't just be in the head, it should be in the heart and in the gut, the dantian, and pulling the Eastern ways of being into the AI. But again, the AI will never have that. So we are an extension, we are a prosthetic. And I've been re-listening to Adrian Tchaikovsky's book. I think it's Children of Ruin, which is with the octopi and essentially the interdimensional biofilm, right? That is like the body snatcher. And the biofilm isn't bad. It just wants an adventure. It wants to look out the eyes of a different being. And the octopi are all about distributed intelligence, and the crown setting the goal, and then the tentacles exploring local conditions. And that's what this phone is. I mean, that's what Bitcoin is. When I made a giant map, and I'll link to it if anybody cares to go back and look at what I was doing a year ago. It's called Decent. And it's about digital democracy. So this helping guy working on crowdsourced swarm intelligence, it's about digital democracy with tokens where you are nodes in a giant parallel processing system, the psychic and computer. That's kind of my word for it. And your processing, it's exactly like what I've been looking at with Oliver Reiser and the World Sensorium since 1946. They've known that this is coming. But we don't talk about it like this. We have all these other different little stories, and think about all the different little influencers who stay in their lane and speak narrowly about a particular thing, and they get your coherence. While it's nice to be asked what my opinion is, my response was, I have a ton of information out there. Think for yourself. Make your own decision. I'm not here to tell you how to think, but a whole lot of other people online are to tell you how to think and who's on the in crowd and who's on the out of crowd. And at this point, I'm so out. I'm fine with being out. I'm fine with just spending days pruning shrubbery and moving rocks because they get me, right? It's fine. They get me. And I'm not really angry about it. I've just come to terms. Still do get a little bit worked up. Not because I can see how people are how the innate character of how we operate, how our psychology operates, how our bodies operate, how we try to navigate challenging situations is being used in ways, and I can see it at the meta level. I can't fix it. I can't change it for anybody. I can see it in operation, and I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be doing about it. But in any event, there are numerous things that sort of come together that make me think that I'm supposed to be talking about this. So let me just revisit. So the digital democracy, if you look back, and I'll insert this, it's like a 3-minute clip with Stacy Herbert and Max Kaiser, who are the big Bitcoin people. And it's Stacy is at this event, I think it's in 2014. It's about digital democracy, and she's like, "Hey, Bitcoin, you know, it's money, but it's way more than money. It's other things, right? It's these smart contracts." And I think the international arbitration and the peace movement, which is what I'd gotten into last time with confronting Sherry Honkala and her appearance on that Peace Pentagon webpage, where the lead woman, Laura George, is promoting the using archetypal card games to train benevolent AI. These archetypal fields and the democracy and the participation are part of it. So Stacy Herbert was essentially at this event saying, wait, it's way more than money. It's this other stuff. It's the digital democracy.
Can you talk about this?